Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are, and thank you for attending this installment of Beat the GMAT's Write Like an Expert series, with this particular edition focusing on the London School of Business's 2013-2014 essays. My name is John Fuller, and here is today's agenda, as we wait for the slide to change. Here's today's agenda for the webinar. First, I'm going to provide a little bit of background on ClearAdmit and myself, and then I'll provide a few general application tips, which hopefully won't be news to many of you, but they're good things to be mindful of as you're going through the admissions process. I'll provide you with a bit of an overview about the London Business School, program, and then I'm also going to spend the bulk of the time together talking about the essays themselves, which is why you're all here. Then I'm going to direct you to a few more resources for you to consider utilizing as you prepare your applications, and then we'll have time at the end for questions and answers, which you can submit through the interface for the webinar tool. So, a little background. So, as you may know, ClearAdmit's an educational consulting firm that focuses specifically on helping candidates apply to top MBA programs. We specialize in the MBA, and that's where we've developed our expertise. We work with applicants from around the world for a very large variety of programs, and our goal is to help them maximize their success when they're applying to these business programs and being competitive in the process. Some of the things about us too is that we're the only admissions consulting firm that has been invited to participate in panel discussions for the last 6 years at GMAT's Admissions Officers Conference rather. And our blog has been widely recognized by others as being one of the most read blogs in the industry as it relates to MBA admissions. Our team of admissions consultants has experience both in admissions, working at business schools and having direct admissions experience, but then also in the business industry, or in areas of industry as well. And our model is a little bit unique in that our team consists of full-time employees at ClearAdmit, as opposed to people that might have a full-time job separate from their admissions advising and consulting responsibilities. And we also focus on making sure their team is extensively trained and coached each year so that you can benefit from the latest information about the application process. So again, my name is John Fuller. I'm an admissions counselor here. Previously, I was the Senior Associate Director of Admissions at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. I worked there for 4 years, overseeing all recruitment and admissions activities for the program, for the full-time MBA program. And then prior to that, or prior to my transition into the educational realm, I was working in consulting and doing interactive marketing as well. And there's my contact information in case any of you would like to get a hold of me after this webinar. So, some general application tips for you to live by. Again, as we wait for the slide to change. There we go. So first of all, differentiate yourself by being yourself. So everybody is going to want to stand out from the crowd in a positive way, especially when you're looking at selective programs like LBS. One of the best ways to stand out is to actually be yourself and let that person come through in your application. But of course, that can be easier said than done. A key to successful differentiation is to do some serious self-reflection to determine what your values are, what your priorities, and what your goals are, because more than likely those are really going to be unique to yourself. All business schools are going to want to know these things about you, and you're not going to be able to write effectively if you haven't taken the necessary time to identify what really makes you tick as an individual. And articulating those aspects well can help someone who seemingly has a fairly common background stand out amongst the crowd and help the AdCom know that you're going to be able to contribute to the diversity of thought and experiences within their particular program. Another area is to focus on and to live by is to do your research and show how you fit with their program. Show your values, priorities, and goals, or showing how you can your values, priorities, and goals dovetail perfectly with the program in question is essential. And you really also need to do this in a great level of detail as well. We've all heard the classical, pitfall of someone where a candidate has written a strong essay, but it lacks real connection back to the program in question. You could easily substitute the name of another program into the essay, and it really wouldn't materially change things. Adcoms are very sensitive to this, and it plants some concerns that you're not really passionate about attending their program. And in this environment of very selective schools where they're only admitting a small number of candidates, they want to be fairly confident that you're very eager to attend their program and that you will attend if you're going to be admitted. So if they get this impression that their program is just one of many on your list of schools, that can only serve to hurt your chances of admission, no matter how competitive your particular profile might be. So keep that in mind about the importance of showing fit both academically, socially, and professionally. And then the other apt tip to live by is giving schools the confidence that you have the ability, first of all, to be a leader. So they're all going to be looking for demonstrated leadership, and that you can show that you have taken the initiative to take on leadership roles when possible, and or that you've been selected for leadership roles. Now, business schools understand that where you are in your career, the average applicant might have 4 to 6 years of full-time work experience post-undergrad, somewhere in that domain, and they understand that you might not have had the opportunity to manage hundreds of people and billions of dollars in revenue and those sorts of things. But they still want to see some evidence that you have leadership capability and potential. Another aspect is that you can be an effective teammate. They want to see that you can lead teams, so on that leadership dimension, but also you can be a positive contributor in a group setting. So do you play nicely with others? For an example, looking at London Business School especially, first-year students are going to be divided into groups of, roughly 75 students that take all their core courses together, and then those groups are broken down into study groups of 6 or 7 students each. So with these study groups, students work on assignments pretty exclusively with them, and the school reports that study groups earn about 30% of their first-year grade together working as a team. So as a result, the success of your group, your classmates, and your particular success is going to be tied to your ability to be a good teammate. So you're going to want to make sure that that comes through in your application materials. Then they want to know that you're going to be an effective learner. So this is the academic component of your application. That's going to be assessed by standardized tests, the GMAT, the GRE, or language assessment, and your undergraduate performance predominantly. And in some contexts, depending on what you do professionally, they might also look a little bit at your professional experience to see how you're doing in a very, say, a quantitatively oriented environment. And then they want to see that you can be an effective teacher. So how can you translate your experiences to the classroom? How can you be an effective contributor in the classroom, in your group work, and in other areas while you're in B school? And this is going to be measured most often by the quality of the work that you've done to date, your work experiences. Have you done things that are substantive, that show impact, and ideally that are going to be distinct? Again, things that will separate you a little bit. So with that, keep these app tips in mind as we go through the rest. I'll reference them throughout the rest of the webinar in one way, shape, or form. But now let's dive a little bit into LBS and talk about some of the aspects of their program. Again, hoping that the slide will actually change. Well, the next slide as we come up, the one thing I was going to show you was a little bit about their class profile, talking about average GMAT relative to some other peer schools, most notably European programs, their class size, and then also their acceptance rate. And I'm sorry, the slide appears to not be shifting very directly. But just to give you some context, I'll describe, imagine if you will. I have four or five schools that are up on the list: Cambridge, Oxford, INSEAD, LBS, and again, those tend to be peer schools that students might be looking at in the European domain. And the average GMAT for LBS is definitely at the upper end of the spectrum at about a 698 last year. And sorry, let me see if I can get, I apologize. LBS is at the upper end of the spectrum relative to GMAT. And then from a class size perspective, it's also at the upper end, being second behind INSEAD's much larger class. LBS has a class size of about 400, and INSEAD's closer to 1,000. And then their acceptance rate, they are one of the more selective programs, being at about 13% in recent history. And Oxford and INSEAD, they don't actually report their acceptance rates, but imagine that they're also rather competitive. And there we go. There's that beautiful slide. I don't know if that was really worth waiting for. But you can get in a ballpark in terms of what that class profile looks like. LBS is also known for its international student body. Only about 9% of the students are from the United Kingdom, and they can represent each year roughly from over about 60 nationalities. So it definitely has a very international student body. It has a flexible curriculum. LBS students have somewhat unique opportunity to select the duration of their studies. You can elect to graduate after 15, 18, or 21 months of coursework, and that length is going to be influenced by course waivers, your pre-MBA background, and the career aims that you have. But it's nice to have that flexibility of when you want to make your exit point. And then they also are well known for their success in placing graduates in finance roles. Roughly a third of students work in the finance industry post-graduation, but actually almost an identical number go into consulting each year. Roughly 2/3 of the students will end up staying in Europe. So from a geographic perspective, most people are staying in Europe, with about 50% of the total student body staying in the United Kingdom itself. So those are the things that LBS is going to be known for. So if you're going to research LBS, I imagine many of you have already done some due diligence, but of course, a shameless plug. ClearMit has a number of publications about LBS that you can reference that could be of benefit to you. But in terms of LBS resources, here are a couple of homepages that if you haven't attended to already, I think you'll find is having some pretty rich content and great means of getting to know more about the program, including their homepage. Student ambassadors, that's a great way to hear directly from the student's perspective in terms of what their experience has been like. The admissions committee has a blog which is updated fairly regularly, and then there's also a student blog which has some really valuable insights on it as well. So as you're researching the program, I'd recommend you take a look at those sites. So on to the essays. So forgive all this text, and I won't insult your reading ability by reading this to you. But this year there's been a relatively significant departure from the essays that they've done in the past. This year's set of essays, the changes come in terms of the overall focus and then the total number of questions as well. Last year, for instance, they had 6 required questions to just 3, and the word count has changed pretty dramatically. I believe last year it was around 1,700 words were required, or a maximum of 1,700 words were required, and this year they're down to about 1,200. However, some of the things that have remained consistent are a strong emphasis on the fit between the applicant and the student community as well. That's certainly remained, and you can see that Oliver Ashby made some notes on his blog about their thoughts about why they shifted gears with their essays a little bit. So here are the actual the essays for this year. Again, as I mentioned, there are 3 essays totaling 1,200 words. The first one being, what will your future look like after completing your MBA? The value that you add to London Business School, and then also the school's responsibility to you, and what is your responsibility for the school? So the previous essays, when you look at that first prompt, what is your future going to look like? Historically, this has been divided into 2 separate essays on your goals. One being on short-term, including on how LBS would help you achieve those goals, and then one separate essay on your long-term goals, with the time frame being 5 years and beyond. This new essay consolidates these 2 topics and takes the word limit from 700 words for the 2 essays to 500 words for the new singular essay. This year's essay 2 is a partial rephrasing of last year's essay 4. So if you were actually comparing the 2, you would map them in that way. So essay 2 to essay 4. And essay 4 last year focused on your planned involvement in and contributions to student clubs and organizations. However, this year's iteration is a little bit broader in scope. It's not just limited to student clubs and organizations. And the third essay is really unlike any of last year's essay prompts. It's really, I would say, something that they started from scratch with. And I'm going to hold my comments, or my more in-depth comments I want for later, but it is a pretty distinct thing relative to what you might have read before. One technical note to keep in mind, as I commented, the total word count is 1,200 words. It could, depending on what other schools you've looked at or you're looking at, some schools might be somewhat flexible about this limit. They might not penalize you if you are, if the limit was 1,200, and if you were at 1,201, they were going to turn a blind eye to that and not really be too concerned. However, LBS is very strict in that you should not write more than the prescribed limit. so do not write more than the specified word limit for each essay, because they're very adamant that extra words or essays may be disregarded completely. And they even go so far as to usually require you to add a total word count at the end of each question submission that you have. So be very mindful of the volume of text that you're putting together, and be sure not to exceed that 1,200 word count, because that certainly would not reflect well on your application in terms of being a rule follower. So for essay 1, what is your future going to look like after completing your MBA? As I previously mentioned, this essay is a consolidation of 2 of last year's prompts. And it's really the only clear opportunity to talk about your professional goals. In previous years, London divided its question into the applicant's goals into those 2 discrete questions, into those 2 phases. This year's topic is a slightly more typical when it comes to your career goals essay. The candidates should be alert to that the language is a little bit broader, in that it talks just about what your future looks like, as opposed to what are specifying what your professional goals might be. It's broad in 2 ways that I see. The first way is that it's broad in that it doesn't specifically state whether they're looking for short or long-term goals. But be sure to address both of these aspirations, though. Don't neglect one or the other. Take advantage of that word count to provide robust details about your post-MBA plans, with more content focusing on your short-term aims. As with any career goals essay, you're going to want to show how your experiences to date, when combined with the LBS MBA, are going to make your aspirations a reality, and how they are realistic, an emphasis on the word being realistic. And definitely be sure to tie your goals back to specific ways that LBS and how LBS can contribute to actually achieving those goals. The second thought about the wording, the second way that the wording of this essay implies that when outlining their future, applicants aren't really only limited to discussing topics that are in the professional realm. While it doesn't expressly state that, this is a professionally oriented essay, but beyond career goals alone, candidates could consider any other important details in their futures in order to demonstrate to the AdCom that you have a highly developed sense, of where you want to be upon graduation from LBS. You could structure your response to this essay by devoting the larger portion of the 500 words to your careers before deciding what other elements might be incorporated, such as, for example, where do you want to spend your career from a geographic perspective? So do you want to work in Europe? Do you want to work in a more of an emerging market context and the like? How are you going to be involved in your professional and or personal community after graduation? Or any other involvement that you might have with LBS as an alum. Those are things that you might consider if you're going to broaden it beyond the career scope. I've indicated that roughly about 300 words be focused on the professional dimension, with the balance maybe touching on topics that that might fall out of your typical professional dimension. But that's really going to depend on your own unique story and plans. But you could maybe use that as a guide point as you're starting to draft those essays. The main point that I want you to leave with is that you should really be spending the bulk of this essay focusing on the professional context. As I mentioned in my app tips to live by, doing all of this well in terms of writing this essay and revealing what your goals are is going to require some serious introspection about your values, priorities, and goals, and then also taking the time to articulate them well. Your goal is going to be to show that you have clarity around what it is that you want to do with your life to the degree that that is possible. We know that that could be a fluid thing. That you need to demonstrate fit to LBS and their method of education. And then also reveal that you're passionate about the LBS experience and the opportunities that are going to be presented for your future. So moving on to essay 2. The second question revolves around what you're bringing to the table. In other words, what is in it for us from the perspective of LBS? Questions similar to this one have appeared in one form or another on the LBS application for several years, and this is the latest prompt. In this latest prompt, rather, highlights the AdCom's continued interest in gauging candidates' knowledge of London Business School and their ability to reflect on their fit within its MBA program. There, we got our slides back. As I stated earlier, last year's prompt focused on your planned involvement and contributions specifically to student clubs and organizations. However, this year's iteration is broader in scope, and responses can expand to include academics and other areas. It's something that you could be considered. Not only should you be discussing the clubs and events that you would like to participate in while you're on campus, but you also want to be certain to show your potential for bringing concrete value or improvements to these school offerings. So how can you make a difference in what's going on at the school? This framing is going to give you a wide berth to discuss how your interests and experiences to date are going to translate into tangible contributions and impact. As with any essay of this sort, it'd be ideal to link your subject matter, so the clubs or organizations or academics that you're focusing on, to the components and elements and interests that you discussed in in essay 1, in terms of what your goals are. These connections are going to show some consistency, and again, they're going to help the admissions committee readily see how you're poised to make a contribution. What's really important with this, as with everything, is specificity. You know, it's important for this essay to be successful if you're going to be connecting your background and goals to these topics such as courses, clubs, and events. So rather than speaking in generalities, you really need to be specific about that. Given the word count limitations of about 300 words, I would recommend that you stick to 2 or 3 areas to highlight, as opposed to going a laundry list route of just rattling off a whole bunch of classes or a whole bunch of student organizations and clubs. They do have roughly 70 professional and social clubs for you to consider if you're looking at that club dimension. So there is a lot to choose from, but limiting yourself to a few is going to reflect more positively within your actual essay. So keep that in mind. You know, taking the time, as one of the things I mentioned was doing your due diligence and researching this program to show fit. So taking the time to learn about the school's special programs and extracurriculars, whether through a visit to campus, if that's possible for you, talking to alumni, or leveraging the resources that I noted earlier in the presentation, are really going to pay a lot of dividends in terms of this essay. So, you know, be sure, like I said, to not just, you know, review the website in terms of reading what a club is all about or a particular course description, but do what you can to actually connect with individual people. So whether they be current students or alumni or members of the admissions office, to learn to a greater depth as to what these things are all about, and then that will help you to articulate more fully what value you're going to be able to bring to the London Business School. So the final prompt is somewhat unusual, to be honest with you, relative to the essays required by other leading business schools, as this question allows applicants the opportunity to present your expectation for the London Business School. So what is the school's responsibility to you, and what is your responsibility to the school? It shows that they want to see that you're aware that the MBA experience is a two-way street, and that you're contributing back to the school in some way, as opposed to it really being a one-way transaction where you come to school, you spend some time, you take some classes, and then you get a degree. So they want to make sure that you're aware of that you need to be a contributor as well, and you have a responsibility to do that. So applicants have a chance to showcase your personalized understanding of the LBS MBA and explore how this idea of mutual responsibility should figure into your business school experience. This is also going to be another opportunity to highlight those abilities and experiences that you have in your background that are going to make you a good fit with the program and allow you to uphold certain responsibilities to the school in turn. As with each essay in this particular set, both professionally and personally focused ideas are really going to be fair game. And applicants should ensure that your ideas here complement the thoughts expressed in your other essays while not directly overlapping in content. So you don't want to be redundant or directly redundant with other things that you've talked about in your other essays. Hopefully it'll be additive. For the narrative about your particular responsibility, you're going to want to use this essay to suggest how you envision having an impact at LBS, making it a better place than you found it, and making the best use of the school's program. You can also speak to your responsibilities to the program's constituent groups, such as your classmates, faculty, alumni, corporate partners, and so on. Focusing on someone besides yourself and your own personal needs is a challenge for anybody who's in a rigorous MBA program. So you're going to want to consider how you'll balance demands on your time and think about how you can provide evidence of successes in the past. It's going to be important to making this, to showing that kind of evidence in this essay. With roughly 400 words allotted for this two-part question, we suggest that candidates outline your thoughts on LBS's responsibility to its students before more personalized commentary about how those responsibilities might align with your planned engagement with the LBS MBA program. Let me see if I can get my slide to cooperate here again. I've been trying. So that concludes my discussion on the particular essays and the details on that. And some of the resources that you can consider utilizing with ClearAdmit are, we have one-on-one consulting services where you can email us a copy of your resume or CV for a free initial assessment of your candidacy. You can do that simply by emailing info@clearadmit.com. As I mentioned, we offered a number of publications that focus on schools, strategy, interview, and school selection guides. We have over 59 titles, including this particular program. And we also have application guidance and in-depth research reports on leading schools as well. We've also developed an online course developed by our admissions insiders on how you navigate the actual MBA admissions process. And then we also have an iPhone app, which is valuable in terms of keeping yourself on task and on schedule. And then there's also the broader ClearAdmit MBA admissions community, most notably through our blog, which is simply blog.clearadmit.com. And that's a great resource for news, advice, and again, other resources for business school applicants. So with that, we'll take questions. And again, I apologize for the seeming complications with the slides. I'll talk to the Beat the GMAT organizers about releasing the actual content to the people that attended, and hopefully that way you'll be able to see some of the written narrative that I included on these slides. But thank you again for your sympathy. So first question, do you know the range of GMAT scores for the London Business School? Yeah, the GMAT range is actually quite wide. The 80th percentile is between 600 and 780, and I believe that was for the class that entered in 2012 as opposed to 2013. Usually schools find that they have pretty consistent metrics in that regard from one year to the next, but like I said, the 80th percentile range is or last year was between 600 and 780. So another question, what is the difference between question 2 and question 3 in terms of what is my contribution to LBS? That is definitely a good question. So again, as when we look at last year's questions and then compare them to this year, the rephrasing that occurred between the second and the third, or excuse me, the second question versus what it was last year. The question last year, focused on clubs and organizations, and our thought is that you should still continue to have that be an area of emphasis for you. Again, it is a little bit broader, so that you could expand it a little bit in terms of the subject matter that you have. But again, I think it's what kinds of contributions are you going to make specifically to organizations and constituent groups to an extent. But again, focusing on focusing on that. So from the responsibility standpoint, what are the school's responsibilities? And I believe, I don't know if you can see the particular slide here that that's on the screen. That might help a little bit. But some of the things you can focus on in terms of what's reasonable for you to expect from the school could be things about career-related opportunities on campus, being responsive, up-to-date instruction, those kinds of things. And again, those topics aren't necessarily going to be reflected at all in an essay 2. And then that responsibility dimension, I think, again, focusing on a little bit more of a macro level in terms of what are you doing for the overall community as opposed to specific organizations. I would say that would be the detail that I would recommend if I was helping someone develop some strategy on that particular essay. So another question, what do they look for in an essay, and what are the parameters for essay grading? Well, I think, going back to those application tips that I mentioned earlier on at the beginning of the presentation, I think there's a lot of benefit to adhering to those, because that's what they're going to be looking for within the within essays. Some people will be so fundamental to say, like, well, for one, you have to answer the question, which is definitely truthful in terms of, if they're grading an essay, they want to make sure that you are you're answering the question at hand. But again, they want to see that you have a clear vision for what it is that you want to accomplish, that it's clear to them that you have a realistic view in terms of how LBS is going to help enable you to be successful in that degree, that you are a good fit for their community as well. So again, some of the things that I mentioned earlier on in terms of they're very international in terms of their student body constituencies. And then also in terms of what people do and where they go after graduation. So those are some things that you would want to, I believe, emphasize within your essay responses. Another question is, what is the weightage of extracurricular activities towards admission? So extracurriculars are certainly an important dimension when AdComs are looking at a particular candidate. And here's the reason why. So what many schools, including LBS, are very much organizing those clubs and doing those events. While administration is going to be involved, a lot of them really are student-led and student-driven. So what extracurriculars, your pre-MBA extracurriculars show is some evidence that you've been involved, that you are making an attempt to do things beyond just just work or just things that might be related directly to your personal life, that you have outside interests and that you have a track record of that. Because that's evidently or usually a good indicator that you're going to exhibit those behaviors as well when you're actually in the program. So they do get, are extracurriculars going to trump your academic background? No, I would say not. Are they going to trump, clarity of goals? So, your goals might not be so clear, but you have a lot of extracurricular. No, they're not going to trump that either. But it's definitely an important ingredient in helping the school to see that you're fit to be a good member of their community, and you're going to be that positive contributor that they're hoping from. So aside from finance, what other study areas are strong at LBS? Well, one of the things I mentioned at the beginning is that they put roughly an equal number of individuals into finance as they do into the consulting arena, or in consulting industry. So I believe it was actually 30 last year, or for the last year that the percentages were available. 32% went into the finance industry and 33% went into consulting. So, and I think from one year to the next in recent history, it's just flipped back and forth by a percentage point or two in terms of which one came out on top. So from that standpoint, what your takeaway from, obviously they do have strength in finance. It is one of the things that they're well known for, but also any school that performs so well in the consulting domain is going to be very strong when it comes to strategy and the quality of their strategy program and their strategy professors. But those are some of the things that strategy and consulting are one of those that, but any MBA program at this level is going to have a very high degree of competence across essentially all of its different academic disciplines, and is also going to have connections and strength in placing candidates into a very broad variety of fields as well. So here's a magic question that we get quite frequently. Can you weigh GPA, GMAT, essays, recommendation letters, and work experience according to importance or level of consideration in evaluating a candidate? Oh boy. So schools are going to, the answer that they're going to give you more often than not is that, they evaluate candidates holistically, and there's no one element that is going to be more or less important within the application process. And to a degree, I would say that is certainly true. They do evaluate, speaking from personal experience, we are looking at the whole candidate when it comes to deciding who we're going to invite for admission or not. But that said, there are some elements which on first blush are definitely going to help either increase or diminish your odds of, say, getting an interview invitation or of being considered somebody who's going to be competitive. And a lot of times when schools are doing that preliminary evaluation of candidates, they are going to focus on that academic dimension being GPA and GMAT. Because part of the reason being, if they're not confident that you're going to be academically successful in the program, then that's kind of a non-starter. Oftentimes from a work experience standpoint, even if you have, in a quantifiable way, fewer years of work experience, you still could have done some very substantive things when it comes to your work experience. But from an academic standpoint, if you have a GMAT average that, a GMAT score or standardized test score that is much lower than what they're normally comfortable with, or if you have a GPA that gives them pause, that can kind of be a non-starter in terms of moving forward. So what I'd encourage candidates to do is, for one, I feel like I'm stating the obvious, but don't undervalue the importance of performing well on your standardized tests. Your undergraduate scores, you can't go back in time and change your performance. Hopefully you did well, but if you didn't, don't necessarily just mourn that. But if you did have a somewhat rough undergraduate experience, then that is going to put all the more emphasis on your standardized test scores. And those things will essentially, in some ways, get your foot in the door for further consideration. And that further consideration being your essays, your recommendation letters, your interview results, and those sorts of things. So I'd say, after your, and again, like I said, schools are going to put, just depending on how their process works in terms of how they screen and evaluate candidates, there's going to be some variability in that. But I would say GPA and GMAT are going to be very important to getting your foot in the door for further consideration. But then they actually then get admitted, then that's when those essays and your interview result and your recommendation letters are going to start taking even more of a position of importance. So the essays being like, okay, we're confident this person is going to be academically competent, but now we have concerns, or now we want to know how crystal clear are this person's or this candidate's goals, and how are we a fit to that? How well can they communicate effectively in an interview context? How well can they tell their story? How consistent is their interview story with what they've shown in their essays? And then the recommendation letters. Recommendation letters, I found, and this could end up being a heated argument amongst admissions folks, but recommendation letters I personally have gotten more cynical towards over the years, or I think admissions committee members have gotten more cynical towards, because there's a lot of question as to, well, who is actually writing this recommendation letter? So is your supervisor essentially just giving a rubber stamp on something that you wrote, or are they actually giving critical insights, or are they doing constructive criticism on your work performance and on your potential for success in your career and at a particular MBA program? So the rec letters are still definitely important, but I would probably peg them a little bit lower than I might have, a number of years ago. Another element too that, again, the questioner didn't mention, but I referred to it, was the interview aspect. There are plenty of instances where someone can appear to be strong across the board when it comes to their academic preparation, the quality of their work experience, the clarity of their goals, the fit for the school, all of those different dimensions that are presented through the printed application. But then when they get to the interview context, there's a huge faltering that happens that can occur at that stage, which can really flip someone to then going from that, yeah, this is somebody who I can imagine admitting, to the interviewer makes an assessment of, no, this candidate's really broken. And you know, and then in that kind of scenario, it's like the best case scenario is sort of a waitlist context. So be mindful of not being dismissive of, oh, okay, I got invited for an interview. That means that I'm a borderline shoe-in, or I'm more than likely going to be admitted to this particular program. You know, don't take that interview experience for granted. For London, the interviewers, you know, different schools will do different things in terms of the level of information that the interviewers have. With London's process, the interviewers have essentially the entire application available to them. So that interviewer is going to be privy to what you said in your essays, privy to what you provided in your resume, what your academic background is, all those different things. So it's going to be very important for you to be on your toes in terms of being aware of what you've submitted, what you've provided within your application, and because they're going to be looking at a critical eye for consistency, the common threads that exist, and that, again, that you can articulate all of these things well and with a lot of specificity. So it seems that a number of the questions that are coming in are very profile specific, but I certainly encourage you to keep asking questions. Please just make them more broad in nature if you can, and that'll increase the likelihood that I'll be able to respond to one. So thank you for that. So here's a question: if you've taken the GMAT more than once, does London take the best score? I will admit, and I hate saying I don't know, but I'm not positive about that one way, yes or no. However, that is a question that programs do get quite frequently, and isn't one that I would shy away from asking the admissions office specifically. So if you contact them, I'm sure they can give you the accurate answer with that in terms of if they take the best score. I can speak from experience in knowing admissions officers at a lot of different schools that the industry norm is to take the best score. They will see the other scores that or prior scores that you've taken, but in terms of what do they actually count, in terms of what it would be included in their school averages, or what would be you know, given the most highlighted within the application review, is going to be the highest score that that you achieved in the multiple context. Some people, sometimes you didn't ask a specific question, but sometimes people say, like, well, how many times is too many? And you know, again, that's going to be somewhat an eye of the beholder question in terms of how many is too many. But I would generally say 4 is the highest number that I would say I would have comfort if I was sitting at, you know, looking at an application. If I started seeing 5, 6, 7 times, I'm going to be very skeptical as to what is the true reflection of this person's performance. Because say, like, on that 7th time, you had a 70% increase, or excuse me, a 70-point increase on your aggregated score. You know, I'm going to have that's great that you ended up having a higher score, and I guess from a process standpoint, I'll count your highest score out of those 7 scores. But then I'm questioning, what is the true reflection of this person's academic ability or likelihood of performing well in that first year of the MBA program? So anyway, so that's my take on that. So how are the scholarship and funding programs at LBS? I know from in looking at their website and reviewing that information, there is a host of information on loan opportunities that are available and funding opportunities. And some of those might be dependent on citizenship, where you're from, your background. They have a scholarship, I believe, through the Forte Foundation as well. So that's for primarily geared towards women. So for the questioner and others that are listening in, I'd encourage you to take a look at their website and look at the opportunities that are most specific to your background and demographic potentially. So during the interview, what exactly do they try to look for in a candidate? Well, you're going to see a lot of thematic trends that are very similar to what to other things that I said that they're going to look for in other parts of the application. You know, they're going to be looking for how well can you articulate your story. So, you know, the classic, you know, walk me through your resume kind of experience. That's one of the things that they're going to be looking for in terms of how well do you convey that. But more so than like what do you say, they're going to be interested in why you made the decisions that you did, whether it be everything from why did you choose the undergraduate program that you attended, to why did you decide to get involved in this extracurricular organization, to why did you make the transition between one company or another, or why you have a background in finance, why is it that you want to make a transition to marketing or a transition to consulting. So being well prepared, you know, it's one thing when you have an essay that you're articulating some of those same concepts and you have all the time in the world available to you to edit and to present those pieces of information in the most coherent manner possible. It's another thing to be caught in like a live fire experience where someone's asking you a question but asking it in a way that you might not have originally prepared for. So it's an important thing to, one, make sure that you have your story straight. Again, I would encourage you to make sure that it's consistent. You know, I've heard of unfortunate situations where, you know, and again, in this kind of context, it's good to know the process that your interviewer with LBS is going to have access to the other parts of your application. And that's not going to reflect well if there are inconsistencies in between what you've talked about within your application materials, your printed application materials, and what you talk about in your verbal responses in that interview context. But they're looking for, you know, and again, they're looking for communication abilities, presentation of self, confidence, those aspects. So, but what is the best way to contact an alum or a current student to learn more insight on LBS? On their website, there is a link to their student ambassador section, and it couldn't be easier. You can go to that link, and they have, I forget the exact count, but I would say it's at least a dozen current or recent students, and it has a little bit of a biography about each one of them in terms of where they're from, their career interests, where what they've done before. And then, like I said, this narrative component, and then it has their email address. So you can reach out to those individuals to probe a little bit more deeply, depending, you know, ideally you could find somebody who has a bit of a match to your background, or a little bit of a match to your background and aspiration, or your aspirations, and reach out to those individuals. But one thing to note from minding your P's and Q's, they note specifically on that page to limit your contact to 2 students. Don't exceed that. It is something that if you end up, for lack of a better word, spamming all of the students who've been made available, that will get back to the admissions committee, and that will reflect poorly on your application materials. So please be judicious about who you reach out to. And, you know, it's one thing if a student says, you know, if you contact one or two students, they get back to you, you have a nice exchange, you ask them, hey, is there anybody else that you might be able to refer me to? And if that student helps to make a contact, might be willing to make a contact, you know, independent of the student advisor or the student ambassador mechanism that's available on their website, that could be something you could consider if you've exhausted those 2, or if you'd like to get more information. But don't just email everybody with the same questions, because that's not looked upon positively. And oh, sorry, I didn't really address on that question about alumni. They also have information on alumni profiles, or excuse me, they also have some alumni profile information in terms of what they've accomplished. Schools will tend to be a little bit more reserved in connecting you with alumni, because alumni tend to be busy, and they don't, you know, want to make sure that people aren't kind of abusing that, at least. But, you know, take a look at the site and see what additional information might be found. And again, as you talk to students, they might be able to refer you to an alum or 2 that would be willing to talk to you through their own personal network. But again, be mindful of not abusing the linkages that are made through the admissions office. So do you find scholarships are more proportional to GMAT scores or overall profile? So that's an interesting question. Scholarships are I guess they're all interesting questions. I guess, sorry, not to cash, so the rest is less interesting. um, again, speaking from my personal experience and my knowledge of how schools that award scholarships, they do tend to be merit-based. I mean, some schools, like a Harvard, for instance, they do a mix of merit and need-based. But a lot of programs, they're limited to merit-based. And so what they'll say is that, you know, merit is tied towards the overall strength of your application, and most frequently they're also, and in terms of determining what is meritorious, they'll say that they're using the same metrics that they're using for admission. That is true, but in reality, they are going to be focusing on a couple of things that are going to help differentiate someone who is going to be receiving a scholarship versus someone who is not. So scholarship money is used to attract competitive candidates, for lack of a better term. And how is competitive defined? Well, as you mentioned, or as you noted, GMAT is going to be something that's competitive. So, you know, someone who has a 780 GMAT is going to be more competitive with a broader variety of schools than someone with a 600 GMAT. Okay, so the likelihood of someone with a 780 getting a scholarship is going to be higher than that person with a lower GMAT. That's kind of a state of the obvious, I would imagine, with that. And schools are, for better or for worse, when it comes to rankings, when it comes to prestige, when it comes to a number of different factors, evaluated by that overall GMAT average. And so they tend to be very sensitive to making sure that they're doing whatever they can to bring in people with very high scores in order to keep that average up. So GMAT is one thing that's going to have a large, or more of a correlation between your likelihood of being awarded a merit-based award or not. Another thing that's going to play into it is how do you fit in terms of their demographic needs. So if you're looking at a program that has an underrepresentation of students from a particular part of the world, and you happen to come from that particular part of the world where they'd like more, then that's going to increase, probably, or more than likely increase your chances of receiving a scholarship. If you, male versus female, again, that's something that, depending on the legal environment of the school that you're applying to, they might be not allowed to talk about it in that way, but there is some truth that women, because there are fewer women who are applying to business schools, so therefore they're more in demand, are more than likely going to be receiving, or are more than likely going to be recipients of scholarship. So anyways, those are things to keep in mind in terms of, so there is that overall profile aspect, but I would say, GMAT demographics, it's probably going to be less so, less around your actual, your career aims or those sorts of things. So to what extent does the brand name of your undergraduate university impact candidacy? It does. So, and some schools are going to be a little bit more sensitive to this rather than not. But your undergraduate performance and where you went to school is going to be more or less relevant depending on circumstances that are particular to your candidacy. So, for instance, say you just graduated from school, 2 or 3 years ago, versus a candidate who maybe graduated from school 8 years ago. More emphasis is going to be put on your undergraduate school performance, et cetera, for that earlier career candidate than it is for the person that has a little bit more experience, is a little bit more senior. So that's one thing. There are other schools that, it depends on where you're from. So for instance, if you're, and again, unfortunately, if you're a candidate from India, schools receive a lot of applications from India, and so schools can afford to be selective. They can afford to be choosy about the individuals that they decide to admit. So as a result, they're going to more than likely pick, if they're looking at a host of people that are applying from India, they can afford to pick the individuals that went to what are considered the top programs in India, people with the top GMATs, so on and so forth. So some schools will use that as a screening tool or a screening device. It certainly is not. It's certainly not going to be mean that you don't have a chance if you didn't go to a top undergrad kind of program, because again, it depends on a number of circumstances. But if you go to a more competitive undergraduate program or a program that has a stronger reputation, that's probably only going to serve to help. Of course, you had to do well while you were there. You could have graduated from a top flight undergraduate program, but if you didn't perform well while you were in the program, then that benefit is diminished somewhat. So let's see here. There are a couple of questions again I would that are specific to process for LBS.